Let me acknowledge the presence of Bishop E. Bernard Jordan of Zoe Ministries, Minister Akbar Muhammad of the Nation of Islam. I'm going to ask those on the side here to, all right. Let me say this I want everyone to take your seat. Wasn't it an honor to have the children of Dr. King, Dr. Abernathy, Malcolm X, Reverend James Orange, the children of those that gave their lives? It's truly an honor. All right. Shh. Last March, at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, every year, the White House Correspondents Association has a dinner. When I looked up, I saw a noted commentator, columnist, and activist leader who has been a friend to me. We don't agree on politics, but we have been helpful to each other, because one thing he is not is a phony, and that is Armstrong Williams. And he and I debate, but we don't debase. And I walked over to him, and he was standing with Dr. Ben Carson. And Dr. Ben Carson and I don't agree on a lot. We probably don't agree today is Wednesday. But I said to him that I had always respected and admired what he did in the medical field, and he was truly someone that I respected. And I respected the fact that even though we disagreed on politics and on the president and other things, that I believe he was sincere in what he said. I do not expect people to agree with me, even though I'm always right. But I do expect people to say and be sincere about what they say. And many people on the right and the left play to the crowd rather than say what they mean. I said, so at some time, I'd like you and I to do my show or do something together, and we can talk. I will never forget when I went back where I was seated, how people were surprised that I would talk to Ben Carson, and I'm sure they were even more surprised where he was seated that he would talk to me. And that is what's wrong with American politics.
Amen.
And that is that we have become so animated with polarized sides that we've lost the ability to disagree but have a dialogue. And I think a lot of it is we're afraid if we hear the other side that we may not find that what we're looking for. People that fought like the parents of the panel that just left for freedom did not fight for us to be free and one-dimensional. In this audience is a woman who gave her life so that you can have the freedom to be a Ben Carson or an Al Sharpton. And I'm talking about Mrs. Juanita Abernathy, the widow of Dr. Ralph Abernathy. We never did the show. I reached out and talked to other Republicans. I had breakfast, as all of you know, with Rand Paul. Newt Gingrich has spoke at this convention, Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly. Though I'm sure they'll forget it by the night, but they've all spoken at this convention. So I said to Armstrong Williams, I said, I'd like Dr. Carson to come and address us. We probably won't agree with him, but we're going to hear what he has to say. And we're going to hear him respectfully because he has the right and he has the ability to be respected by a community that he rose and became a figure that we respected what he did with his life. And to my surprise, Armstrong called me back and said he is not going to do your show, but he's going to speak to the people at the convention, which is a much different ballgame. But that is who he is. And I said, fine. And we arranged it. I'm sure a lot of people said to me, why did you invite Dr. Carson? I just explained. I'm sure even more people told him to not come. But I think that if anything, and I have no idea what he's going to say, but if anything I hope comes out is that we begin to civilize the public debate in our community and in politics so that we can hear each other rather than just bark at each other.
Amen.
And that we, especially those of us that profess to be Christian and profess, and this organization comes out of the King Abernathy Christian Edict, that we listen and observe. Now, a lot of things, I don't agree with everybody on the left. I don't agree with everybody on the right. But I am secure enough in what I believe that I'm not afraid to hear opposing views. Anybody that can't hear opposing views must be insecure about who they are. I told the young lady the other week, if you're married to a man and he got to be home at 7 o'clock, you really are insecure about your marriage. You ain't got to lock up every woman to stay married because you're not dealing with, well, let me get off that. That's a little touchy. Ain't no use going there, Armstrong. So it is in that spirit that we invited Dr. Carson and that he's going to address us. As I thought about it, I've had a friend down through the years that I asked to be the one to introduce him. This man, we met through first reading about each other, Bishop. There was a huge article on him in New York Magazine, and everybody was trying to figure out who Dr. A.R. Bernard was. Just rose like a phoenix, built the largest congregation in New York, then and now. And they said he was, when he was younger, a Muslim, now he was a Republican. I read all of this. God knows what he read about me. We never talked about it. And through a mutual friend, Reverend James Meeks, out of Chicago, we had lunch one day. And we got to know each other. And he is as authentic a person as I've met. The key is his integrity. He does not mind saying, Al, I don't agree with that. I'm not going to do that. Al, I'm going to do this. Al, this is not what I want to be projected, but I will quietly support this. Al, I will publicly disagree with that. That's a friend. But I will never forget 14 years ago, 2001, I led a protest in Puerto Rico, the island of Vieques, against the Navy bomber. When we got to court after sitting in, stopping the Navy bombing, it was for Puerto Rican children. The 3 Latinos that I went to jail with got 40 days in jail. The judge said since I had been doing this all my life, I got 90 days in jail. Something wrong with that coalition, but that's what happened. Reverend Bernard visited me in jail and told me, let's talk when you get out. And I said, all right. When I got out, I didn't think about it anymore. I got a call about 3 days later. I know all of the ministers, preached since I was 4. I've been to every major church in this country. He was the only minister that called and said, didn't I tell you to call me? I said, oh, yeah, I'm sorry. He says, one day when you get a chance, let me know when you could come by the church. And I said, all right. And I told him what day would work on his schedule. And if y'all ever been by his church, it ain't just a church. It's a campus. It's like our version of Vatican City. Y'all from out of town need to go out there and see. Y'all will need a day or so to walk through it. And I said, okay, and I went by, saw his secretary. They brought me up in his office. His private office about the size of this ballroom. That's the inside inner chamber. And he looked at me and he said, I only wanted a few minutes. And I thought he was going to read me a scripture of encouragement after doing 3 months in jail. And he handed me an envelope. He says, I know that you are the sole breadwinner for your family. You've been gone 3 months. And he gave me a check to cover 3 months of bills for my family. I said, I didn't know what to say. All of the ones I'd known all my life never thought about that we were 3 months behind in everything. He said, I don't know that I agree with what you went to jail for, but I do know that you need to be able to take care of your family. That's the kind of man A.R. Bernard is. We all must find a way that there must be some things that we can come together in mutual respect and regard and hear from. When they attacked this city in 2001, 9/11, they didn't ask any of us who was Baptist or Methodist or white or black. They did not make the differences that we make. They didn't check Republican or Democrat. They went at all of us. It's a shame the enemies of the country see us more united than we see ourselves. In that spirit, to introduce Dr. Carson as he speaks in the next few minutes for a few moments at Nash Action Network, I bring you the senior minister of the Christian Cultural Center and a leading religious figure in Christendom all over the world today. I've been with him, with the Cardinal and others, and they all defer to him because of that integrity and because through him he's built a massive ministry. And I would want him to introduce Dr. Carson. So for 2 reasons. 1, he earned it. He has that kind of respect. And 2, so the right wing and the left wing media can't have fun. They can't say Sharpton brought Carson or Carson kissed the ring. There was a giant in between us. So you sit over there, I'll get over here. Bernard did it. Your crowd can't get but so mad. My crowd, well, whatever, they mad anyway. We the angry crowd. Let us welcome Dr. A.R. Bernard.
My goodness. When you have been introduced by the Reverend Al Sharpton, you have been introduced. There's no doubt about that. I am so grateful for the opportunity, the privilege to be here with you, my longtime friend Armstrong Williams and the work that he's been doing, especially with Dr. Carson. And, you know, if you read the newspapers, you would never imagine that certain individuals go to lunch, have dinner, hang out together, and have a relationship, because the media tends to portray us in a very polarizing way. And yet, although we disagree on certain issues, we sit down, we talk, we share. And when there is commonality, we are ready to support each other 100% with all of our resources. And that's the kind of relationship that I've had with Reverend Sharpton. I appreciate what he stands for. Oh, yeah, come on, give him a good hand clap out for him. You know, each prophet has their calling. Jeremiah wept for the people, while Isaiah cried loud and spared nobody. No pun intended. But they were all part of a much greater plan. And people of faith believe that there is always a divine hand involved in whatever it is that's happening in human history. We believe as Christians that God entered history in the person of Christ, changed it, and left us to continue changing history and bringing peace amongst men of goodwill, whether they agree with each other or not. It is that goodwill that brings commonality for us to make it a better world. I had the privilege of meeting Dr. Ben Carson and experiencing town hall meetings with him as we shared a particular agenda and vision for America, American society, and communities within the nation. And I'm privileged, Dr. Carson, to have this opportunity to introduce you. So thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Dr. Benjamin Carson is an emeritus professor of neurosurgery, oncology, plastic surgery, and pediatrics at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. In 1984, he was named the director of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins Children's Center, a position he retired from on June 30th, 2013. In 2008, he was named the inaugural recipient of a professorship in his name, the Benjamin S. Carson Sr., MD, and Dr. Evelyn Spiro, RN, Professor of Pediatric Neurosurgery. Also in 2008, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Honor, Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian honor in our nation. Through his philanthropic work and his foundation, Carson Scholars Fund, he is also interested in maximizing the intellectual potential of every child in our nation. An internationally renowned physician, Dr. Carson has authored over 100 neurosurgical publications and has been awarded more than 60 honorary doctorate degrees. Dr. Carson has written 8 books, 3 of which have been co-authored with his lovely wife, Candy. His 5th book, America the Beautiful, Rediscovering What Made This Nation Great, released early in 2012. And his 6th book, One Nation, What We Can All Do to Save America's Future, released on May 20th, 2014. And they've both made the New York Times bestseller list. His 7th book, One Vote, Make Your Voice Heard, was released on September 22nd, 2014. His 8th book, You Have a Brain, A Teen's Guide to Think Big, which encourages young people to aim high, was released recently on February the 4th of 2015. Of course, he is, as a result, a highly sought-after, world-renowned, inspirational, and motivational speaker. But it was his keynote address at the 2013 President's National Prayer Breakfast that really placed the national spotlight on Dr. Carson. He spoke boldly about his feelings about what's happening in America. He spoke about leadership. He spoke about certain policies, never attacking the individual, but addressing the policies of concern. On March the 3rd, 2015, Dr. Carson announced that he formed an exploratory committee to determine whether he should become a candidate for President of the United States. Now, you know, when they announce that they formed an exploratory committee, that is a pre-announcement to the announcement. And my prophetic imagination tells me that you're going to hear some of that very bold political, social, economic, and moral and spiritual agenda that Dr. Carson imagines for the United States. I always say, when making up your mind about any subject in life, don't just read one book, because then that book has made up your mind for you. Read 2 books, and then make up your own mind. It's important to hear both sides of the argument, both sides of the subject, and make an intelligent decision as to where you're going to stand, what position you're going to take. After 36 years of pastoring in New York City, I discovered there are 4 things that God wants from a man: maturity, decisiveness, consistency, and strength. After 43 years of marriage, I discovered there are 4 things women want from a man: maturity, decisiveness, consistency, and strength. I also discovered that there are 4 things that men struggle with in life: maturity, decisiveness, consistency, and strength. But what I really discovered is that these are the qualities that people look for in a leader. Dr. Carson is one of those leaders, and it is my privilege to present to you Dr. Benjamin S. Carson.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I want to thank my good brother Sharpton for having the courage to invite me to come. You'll not regret it. I'm not going to say anything bad. Probably. Now, and thank you all for your kind attention. You know, America remains a place of dreams. And you have a lot of people with dreams who are trying to get into this country. Not too many people trying to get out of here, so that means it's still a pretty good place. And as a youngster, you know, I dreamed of becoming a physician. And that was perhaps a lofty dream, considering where I was coming from, but still one that I was able to accomplish, and one that I think young people today can still accomplish if they believe that they can do it, and not that they're victims. You know, there were a lot of problems along the way in terms of me realizing my dream. My parents got divorced early on. That was devastating. You know, my mother came from a large rural family, got married when she was 13, and she and my father moved from rural Tennessee to Detroit. He was a factory worker, and some years later she discovered he was a bigamist, had another family. She only had a 3rd grade education, the responsibility of trying to raise 2 young sons by herself. That was going to be extraordinarily difficult. So we moved from Detroit to Boston to live with her older sister and brother-in-law. Typical tenement, large multi-family dwelling, boarded up windows and doors, sirens, gangs. You walk into a dark room and turn the light on, it looked like the wall was moving. There were so many roaches and big rats, water rats. These things could leap 5 feet in the air. And a tremendous amount of violence. I remember seeing people lying in the street with bullet holes. Both of my older cousins, who we adored, were killed. I remember Bo, my older cousin, being beaten severely because he would get in trouble with the police a lot. And, you know, speaking of police, you know, this situation with Walter Scott in South Carolina, you know, I viewed that video with the same horror that I'm sure everyone here did. I was aghast at an execution that occurred without a trial in the streets of America. And this is such a clear-cut case that I believe it's going to give law enforcement in this country an opportunity to really tell us where they are in this controversy. They will have an opportunity to demonstrate which side they come down on. And I believe that's actually going to be a good thing, because you need these clear-cut cases. But I also think that we in the African American community have to make sure that we also recognize that sometimes there's fault on our side. Sometimes we have people who do not obey the law, who do not do lawful things, and who are thugs. And when we try to hold them up as heroes, it kind of makes our legitimate complaints not as substantial. So we have to make sure that we look at things objectively and fairly for everybody. It makes a difference. Now, you know, we were very poor. My mother worked extraordinarily hard, 2, 3 jobs at a time, leaving at 5 in the morning, getting back after midnight as a domestic, cleaning other people's houses. And her friend sometimes says, "Why do you work so hard?" Because a lot of them didn't. You know, they just lived off the system. But she didn't want to do that. She struggled. And sometimes she accepted some public assistance, but for the most part was able to stay off of it. And that's was something that she taught to us too. Now, some people have criticized me. They say Carson grew up poor and he must have had some public assistance and now he wants to withdraw all the safety nets. Let me tell you something. That is a blatant lie. There's not anything that I ever wanted to do, have ever said. What I would like to do, however, is create a system that allows people to move from a state of dependency to a state of independence, where they have control over their own lives. And I think the policies that we enact need to do exactly that. You look at Muhammad Yunus, who won the Nobel Prize in 2006 for his micro-lending program, lifted millions of people out of poverty in Bangladesh and that part of the world. 97+% of those people have paid their loans back and have become independent. Now, we're smart people in this country, and we need to learn how to invest in our fellow man, because it's those relationships and those investments that raise people out of a state of dependency. And that is something that we all can get involved in. And we need to stop listening to all the people who try to engender division and class warfare. And, you know, what we have right now are people in this world, radical Islamic terrorists who want to destroy us and our way of life. We don't need to aid them by fighting each other and trying to destroy each other. That's not helpful for us as a nation. And what we really need to be concentrating on is our economy. And how do we get a robust economy? You know, from 1850 until 2000, our economy grew at a rate of 3.3% on average. From 2001 until 2014, at 1.8%. The long-term forecast by the Fed now is for 2.4%, sort of like the new norm. But I don't believe that that's good enough. And I believe that there are a number of things that we can do, because what we have to do is create a situation where we have good jobs again in this country. Right now, a lot of part-time jobs, a lot of what I call chicken jobs, you know, where, you know, you don't make enough money to really sustain yourself. What we need is a robust economy so that people have real options. And only after people have real options should we start talking about entitlement reform. To do that before that time is really cruel and unusual punishment. And we have the ability to make those kinds of changes. Also, in the black community, We don't need to wait for other people to help us. You know, the fact of the matter is, there is over $1 trillion worth of assets in the black community. And what we need to learn how to do is to turn our dollars over 2 or 3 times in our own community before we send it out. That's how you create wealth. And as that wealth is created, you must reach back and pull the next person up. You can't just turn your back and live in luxury. And that's how many other communities have done it. That's what we must do. We do not have to be dependent, quite frankly, on anybody. And then we need to talk about stuff that we don't talk about. We need to talk about the fact that 73% of our babies are born out of wedlock. That is a problem. And some people say, you're not supposed to talk about that. And every situation is of equal value. It is not of equal value. And, you know, when that woman has that first baby, usually her education ends at that point. And that baby is 4 times more likely to grow up in poverty and end up in the penal system or the welfare system. This is not helpful to our community whatsoever. And unless we begin to talk about it, nobody else is going to talk about it. And we have to stop this cycle, which is devolving over the last several decades. We are actually in worse shape than we were before. And part of it also depends on the fact that we are not holding fast to the values and principles that got us through all the tough times, that got us through slavery and Jim Crow and segregation and all the unfairness that has existed. That strength came from good, solid family values and for believing in God. And we should not allow the movement that is denigrating faith and people of faith and God to also destroy our communities. If people like that want to destroy themselves, let them. But don't allow them to take us with them. Because I think the relationship with God is a great relationship. And, you know, some people have said, you know, Carson's a strange guy. You know, he's supposed to be a doctor, but he doesn't believe in science. That's completely a bunch of crap. You know, how could you become a renowned neurosurgeon without believing in science? It's just that I don't believe some of the stuff that people say is a fact, like something came from nothing. I don't believe that. I don't believe that there could be a big bang and everything suddenly comes into perfect order, all by itself. And, you know, people who say, well, if you have enough big bangs over a long enough period of time, eventually one of them will be the perfect big bang and everything will be perfect. And I say, so you're telling me if I blow a hurricane through a junkyard enough times over a long enough period of time, after one of them, there's going to be a 747 fully formed and ready to fly. You know, basically that's the same argument. And people say, well, you believe the earth is 6,000 years old. I never said I believe the earth is 6,000 years old. I do believe in the Bible, though. The Bible says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, period. Okay? Now, we don't know how long lapsed between that period and the next sentence. It could have been 5 years. It could have been 50 billion years. We don't know the answer to that. But I'll tell you something else. God is God, and he can create an earth any age he wants it to be. You know, that's why he's God, and they're not. We need to understand that. I think it's very arrogant for some scientists to say that just because they can't explain it, it doesn't exist. And that is not something that's ever resonated with me. But, you know, my mother's goal was to leave Boston to be able to come back to Detroit, and she worked very hard to be able to do that. And eventually, we were able to return to Detroit, still in a dilapidated, horrible section. I was a terrible student. Nobody believed in me. Everybody called me dummy. No one believed in me, that is, except my mother. And she was always saying, Benjamin, you're much too smart to be bringing these grades home. I brought them home anyway, but she was always saying that. She was very encouraging, but she didn't know what to do. My brother was doing poorly, so she prayed, and she asked God for wisdom. And you know, that's the wonderful thing about God. You don't have to have a PhD to talk to him. You just have to have faith. And she had faith that he would give her the wisdom, and he did. At least in her opinion. My brother and I didn't think it was all that wise. I mean, turning off the TV, what kind of wisdom is that? and making us read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Libraries every week and submit to her written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. And she would put little check marks and highlights, and we thought she was reading them, but she wasn't. And I was disgusted. Everybody else was outside playing, having a good time. I was stuck in the house reading books, and her friends would say, "You can't make boys stay in the house reading books. They'll grow up and they'll hate you." And I would overhear them, and I would say, "Mother, they're right." But, it didn't matter. We still had to do it. But interestingly enough, even though we were desperately poor, between the covers of those books, I could go anywhere. I could be anybody. I could do anything. I began to know stuff that nobody else knew. I started reading about people of accomplishment. One of my first books, Up From Slavery, the autobiography of Booker T. Washington. Born a slave, illegal to teach slaves to read, but he taught himself to read, read everything he could get his hands on, became an advisor to 2 presidents. That had a profound effect on me. And I began to understand as I read more and more books that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. It's not somebody else. And I stopped listening to all the negativity around me. And people were calling me stuff, but believe me, they were calling me nerd and Poindexter, Uncle Tom, said I was trying to be white, and I would say, well, if being smart is being white, what is being black? They never had an answer to that, but, the fact of the matter is I just kept moving on, and, it was an extremely empowering thing, and I want all of our young people to be empowered like that. Particularly we look at the young black males in America. Many people say the young black male in America is an endangered species because look at the homicide rates in our major cities. Look how many people are involved in the justice system. And it's just not a good situation for us at all. But anybody who's been in education knows that, the young black males, kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, they're good students just like everybody else, cooperative and nice. And then as they start getting a little older, that peer pressure thing starts to kick in. And then, they start reading their American history book, and they notice there's nobody who looks like them who really contributed to the greatness of this nation. And they say, well, maybe next year when I take world history, but next year they take world history, the same thing happens. And everybody wants to know, where do they fit in? What did their ancestors do? And then they come home and they turn the TV on. Oh, there we are, playing basketball, baseball, football, rapping in those baggy pants, acting a fool on some sitcom. You begin to gain a very different impression of what success for you means. But by the time they realize they're not going to be the next Michael Jordan or Puffy Daddy or somebody like that. I know what his real name is. Okay. But by that time, what's left? What's left? Up drives this big black Mercedes with tinted glass, and out steps this tall guy with jewels and furs and women. Want to be like me? I can show you how to get all this stuff. Plus, that society has sold you a bill of goods. They owe you. The next thing you know, you're looking at TV, the 6 o'clock news, you see a young man being led away in handcuffs trying to shield his face. You say, that looks like little Johnny. What happened? He was such a good boy. What did happen? Indeed, it happens dozens of times every day in this country. Little Johnny's going the wrong way, getting the wrong impression. And it never had to happen because any of us could have taken little Johnny by the hand when he was 6 years old and walked down the streets of New York or any other city and given him a black history lesson he would have never forgotten. You could have started by pointing to his shoes and saying it was Jan Matzliger, a black man who invented the automatic shoe lasting machine, revolutionized the shoe industry throughout the world. Step on that clean street. Charles Brooks, a black man, invented the street sweeper, those machines with the big brushes. Down that street comes a big refrigerated tractor trailer truck. Frederick Jones, a black man, invented the refrigeration system for trucks, later adopted for airplanes, trains, and boats. It comes to a stop at the red light. Garrett Morgan, a black man, invented the traffic signal. And you can also tell how he invented the gas mask, saved lots of lives during the war. And while you're talking about the war, Henrietta Bradbury, a black woman who invented the underwater cannon, made it possible to launch torpedoes from submarines. And you'll see a beautiful black woman walking down the street. A black man did not invent her, but you can use that opportunity to talk about Madam C.J. Walker, a black woman who invented cosmetic products for women of dark complexion, was the first woman of any nationality in this country to become a millionaire on her own efforts. And you walk past the hospital, Charles Drew, his contributions to blood banking, understanding the function of blood plasma. Daniel Hale Williams, the first successful open heart surgery in the world, operative mortality rate less than 1.5%. You look up at the surgical light, Thomas Edison, you didn't know he was black, did you? Well, he wasn't. But his right-hand man, Lewis Latimer, was. And you can tell how Lewis Latimer came up with the filament that made the light bulb work for more than 2 or 3 days. How he invented the electric lamp, pioneering work in incandescent fluorescent lighting. Diagrammed the telephone for Alexander Graham Bell. Was a tremendous inventor in his own right. Most people have never even heard of him. You walk past the railroad tracks. Andrew Beard, the automatic railroad car coupler, spurred on the Industrial Revolution. Elijah McCoy, the automatic lubrication system for locomotive engines. He had so many inventions. When something would come out, people would say, is that a McCoy? Is that the real McCoy? You got racist people like David Duke talking about the real McCoy, don't even know who they're paying homage to. And I'm just barely scratching the surface. Now, so you can see that young man has no reason to doubt that his ancestors played an important role in the establishment of this nation, and he should feel fully a part of this nation and should work very hard to strengthen the fabric of this nation. But you know, I could take that same walk down the street for virtually any nationality and point out all kinds of contributions. You see, that's one of the things that made America into a great nation, because we had so many people with so much talent from so many different places. And our diversity is not a problem, it is a blessing. And we need to understand that we are all in the same boat. And if part of the boat sinks, the rest of it's going down too. And let's not play into the whole enemies thing, because that's not helping us. Now, just a few things that I want to clear up in terms of perceptions about me. Some people think I don't know how horrible slavery was because I said Affordable Care Act was the worst thing since slavery. Well, let me tell you something. There is nothing that even slightly compares to slavery in this country. I said since slavery. There are a lot of things that have happened since that. Nothing even becomes remotely similar to slavery. You know, I've had my roots traced back, all the way back to my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, who came from the Turkana tribe, which is a migratory tribe even today in Tanzania and Kenya. And I know about 2 of my ancestors, a brother and sister, who were sold to separate owners as children, and it broke their hearts, and they swore that they would find each other. And after the emancipation, they were in their 60s, and they found each other. But, you know, the pain and the heartache associated with that era, there is nothing that compares to it. And when people say that Carson's comparing it, they are simply trying to create a wedge. That is not what I said. That's not what I meant. However, a lady came up to me in the airport and she said, an African-American lady, I like a lot of stuff you say. It makes a lot of sense. But why don't you want poor people to have health care? I said, once again, you're listening to the propaganda. I want poor people and everybody to have health care. Is health care a right? No, but it is a responsibility of a compassionate society. And we are a compassionate society, and we have the ability to do it. We spend twice as much on health care as the next closest nation in the world. And yet we have horrible access problems. We have 2-tiered medicine, and that leads to a lot of disparities. So the health savings account system that I've outlined works extremely well for everybody who's working. But what about the people who are indigent? What are you going to do for them? Well, how do we take care of them now? We take care of them with Medicaid. What is the annual Medicaid budget? $400 billion a year. About 80 million people partake. $80 million into $400 billion goes 5,000 times. $5,000 is a peach. What could you do with that? The concierge or boutique practices cost $2,000 to $3,000 a year. So we could put everybody in Medicaid on one of those, a luxury program, and still have thousands left over for catastrophic health care. I'm not advocating that we do that. I'm saying that's how much money there is. What if we were to use the money in an intelligent way and take this thing out of the political arena and start taking care of our patients, start taking care of all the people in our country? If we give all of those people health savings accounts, everybody's dollar is of equal value. You don't have a two-tiered system. You don't have people saying, well, I'll only take this many of this kind of patient. That's what we want. We really want equality for everybody in every policy that we use across this nation. And that's what I'm really most concerned about. People say, aren't you concerned about your reputation? No. I am concerned about the welfare of our nation, and I'm concerned about the next generations that come after us. That is much more important than my reputation, to be honest with you. And another misperception, people say that I hate gay people. I don't hate gay people. I just happen to believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. That's all. You know, it doesn't mean that I hate gay people. And some people seem to believe that you can't have the one without the other. If you don't want them to be married, then you hate them. Absolutely not true. And I will tell you, I really don't care what any man has to say. I care what God has to say. And that is always going to be what centers me. And some people say, he doesn't like black people. He hates its race. What a piece of crap that is. You know, I love black people. My wife is a black person, and I love I mean, give me a break. This is so ridiculous. And, you know, one of the reasons that we put reading rooms in all over this nation with the Carson Scholars Fund, we particularly target Title I schools, where kids come from homes with no books, they go to schools with no libraries. Those are the ones who drop out of school. 20 to 30% of people drop out of school in this country. And these rooms are places that will teach kids the love of learning. And they can get prizes for the books they read. In the beginning, they do it for prizes, but it has a profound effect on their academic performance. That's the kind of thing that makes the difference. We have to make all of those kinds of differences. And then there are some who says, I say that there's no racism. Of course there's racism. There will be racism as long as there are people with small minds and evil forces to stimulate them. But I'll tell you how my mother taught me to think about it. She said, if you go into an auditorium full of racist, bigoted people, you don't have a problem. They have a problem. Because you see, they're all going to cringe and wonder if you're going to sit next to them, whereas you can go sit anywhere you want. So, you know, that's kind of the way that I've begun to look at it. And let me just close by talking a little bit about what true success is all about. True success. You know, I was asked in 1997 to come to South Africa to head up a team in an attempt to separate type 2 vertical craniopicus twins. Siamese twins joined at the top of the head, facing in opposite directions. There have been 13 attempts to separate twins like that before, none of which have been successful. So I knew it was going to be a great medical challenge, but it was also going to be a great social challenge because it's going to be done at the Medical University of South Africa at Medunsa, the only major black teaching hospital, always the stepchild throughout apartheid and in the post-apartheid period. This is going to be their chance to stand shoulder to shoulder with Cape Town, Johannesburg, all the other great universities. I wasn't ready for all that social pressure. I said, Lord, you're going to have to show me something here because greater people than me have tried and failed. And as I was studying their anatomy, I noticed that the common drainage system they shared was narrower centrally than peripherally. The traditional neurosurgical literature said you should divide them over 3 or 4 operations with many weeks or months in between so they could develop collateral circulation. But I felt if we concentrated on the area where the drainage was already narrow, that they would develop collaterals immediately. And I explained it to the team, and they said, you're the boss, we'll do whatever you want to do. Well, 2 days before New Year's of '98, going to the OR, big sign over the OR that said, God bless Joseph and Luca Banda. They were having song service and prayer service. I was thrilled. I said, can we bring a stereo and can play inspirational music? I love to listen to music. I operate. 19 hours into that surgery, We were only 3/4 of the way finished. The part that remains was so complex, the blood vessels were engorged, they were entangled, they were adhesed, it looked impossible. We stopped the operation. We went into a conference. I suggested we could cover the area over with skin and come back in a few months, and they would have developed enough collaterals that we could now cut through. And the doctors from Zambia, where the twins were from, and South Africa said, that's a great idea, and I know it would work at Johns Hopkins. But we don't have the ability to keep partially separated twins alive. They'll die. Now I really felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. I went back in there. I didn't have all my fancy equipment I have at Hopkins. I had my surgical loops, a scalpel, and a prayer on my lips. I said, Lord, it's up to you. I started cutting between those vessels that were so thin you could see the anesthetic bubbles coursing through, just daring you to make a nick. And I remembered the first set of twins we operated on, we used 60 units of blood. And the second set, 80 units of blood. And I was thinking, there is not enough blood in South Africa if we get into these things. Make a long story short, when I made the final cut that separated those twins over the stereo system came the Hallelujah Chorus. And everybody had goosebumps. And when we finished that operation, after 28 hours, one of the twins opened his eyes, reached up for the endotracheal tube. The other one did the same thing. By the time we got to the ICU, we only used 3 units of blood. And in 2 weeks, they were crawling, and today they're in high school doing perfectly well. But you know what? That was not the success. That was not the success. The success you had to be there to witness was the reaction of the people. This was done in their country, in their hospital. Their level of self-esteem was through the roof, and that's what true success is, using the talents that God has given you to elevate other people. Thank you, and God bless.
Dr. Ben Carson. Let me say, you may not be my choice for president, but if I need surgery, you my man. I'm going to get him out because he has one thing he insists on doing every day, and that's watching Politics Nation at 6 o'clock. Thank y'all.